Welcome to the SADF podcast. Today, we speak with Pitasanna Shanmugathas, a Canadian Tamil documentary filmmaker, peace advocate, and law student at the University of Windsor. Prasanna holds a Master of Global Affairs from the University of Toronto and is known for his bold explorations of foreign policy and justice through film. His latest work, Neelan Unsilenced, resurrects the voice of Dr. Neelan Tiruchelvam, a Sri Lankan Tamil constitutional lawyer, academic, and human rights activist. Neelan was a tireless advocate for pluralism, reconciliation, and democratic reform, whose life was tragically cut short by an LTTE suicide bombing in 1999. Together, we explore the legacy of a man who dared to imagine peace in a time of war and the filmmaker who brought his story back to life. Welcome, Prasanna.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, first of all, I would like to know more about Advocate Neelan. That if you can explain to us that who he was and what is his legacy.
Absolutely. I think to understand who Neelan was, we have to start from the beginning. So Neelan was born in January of 1944, and this was 4 years prior to Sri Lanka gaining independence from British colonial rule. So Neelan, Sri Lankan Tamil, part of the Tamil minority ethnic group in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's consists of a Tamil minority ethnic group and also the Sinhala majority, which constituted 78% of the population at that time. Neelan was born to a very economically affluent family relative to the rest of the population of Sri Lanka, whether Sinhala or Tamil. They were overwhelmingly poor during the time of independence.
Yes, I have read that his father was a lawyer and his mother was a doctor, if I'm not wrong.
His mother got accepted into medical school, but
Hmm.
she had dropped out because she met
Okay.
Neelan's father and she got married. She regretted not being able to go for complete medical school, but she worked with the Red Cross in
Hmm.
Sri Lanka, and she went abroad to the U.S. and supported the Red Cross there, and was very much a philanthropist because
Right.
their affluent lifestyle afforded her the ability to do that, being
Yeah.
somewhat of a feminist even at that early age. Neela was born shortly before Sri Lanka gained independence. Once Sri Lanka gained independence, Sinhalese majority, which constituted 78% of the population on that island, they soon began imposing discriminatory policies against the minority Tamil ethnic group. So during British colonial rule, the minority Tamils were disproportionately favored by the British. They were disproportionately represented in the Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon, civil administration, in the military, in engineering, in very affluent sectors of society. In the military, the Tamils represented somewhere close to 40%. In the civil sector, they represented a disproportionate amount in engineering, and this was due to the fact that British missionaries, they were situated in Sri Lanka in the Tamil heavily populated areas of the country. So Tamil people were far more fluent in English than Sinhala people. So despite the fact that Tamils constitute less than 20% of the population, they were represented overwhelmingly in the civil sector. And the Sinhala majority, the 78%, were extremely upset by this fact that the Tamils were economically advanced and had a far more advanced position within society relative to them. So when Sri Lanka gained independence, the Sinhalese majority, they imposed discriminatory policies against the Tamil minority, beginning with the Sinhala Only Act, which resulted in the language of Sinhala being the sole official language of the country, and it immediately disenfranchised the Tamil minority in places like the military and the government sector. Overnight, they were unemployed, and this was a huge economic disenfranchisement of the minority. And immediately, what followed the Sinhala Only Act were ethnic pogroms against the Tamil minority community, which were often sponsored and backed by the Sri Lankan government. So Neelan grew up in a time seeing this ethnic strife, this ethnic violence And Neelan's father, Murugesan Tiruchelvam, and he was a minister of local government. He was a politician who was advocating for a federal solution to try and resolve the grievances of the Tamil minority community. So Neelan grew up at a time and seeing this strife, and he grew up in a very politically active household. So decades and decades later, when pogroms and routine acts of violence were being committed against the ethnic minority Tamil community, in 1983, there was a brutal pogrom against the Tamil community in July of 1983, which had resulted in the burning of Tamil homes, the burning of Tamil people, the looting of and destruction of Tamil property in Colombo, which is the de facto capital of Sri Lanka. And this had triggered a 25-year civil war in Sri Lanka. And Neelan would become a member of parliament in Sri Lanka in 1994, and he would help introduce a bold set of constitutional reform proposals designed to bring a peaceful end to the ethnic conflict. And in his quest to do so, he was brutally assassinated by the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, LTTE, who were a Tamil separatist rebel group who had assassinated Neelan because he differed from their view of a separate state and wanted to bring forward a political solution under a united Sri Lanka. So that's a short version of a much larger history of who Neelan was.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Because Neelan represents that part of politicians who would prefer reconciliation over use of force, which is very rare nowadays. And day by day, these kind of people are becoming more rare. So, my next question is that what actually inspired you to make Neelan Unsilenced? Was there a personal or political moment that sparked the idea?
What inspired me to make Neelan Unsilenced is I'd have to first tell you how I came to know of significantly about Neelan Tiruchelvam. I came
Please.
to know of Neelan Tiruchelvam years after his death. I was 3 years old when he died, so I didn't know of his work while he was alive. But I soon, as a young boy, I was 13 years old when the civil war in Sri Lanka came to an end. And I saw on mainstream television the final stages of the civil war in 2009, where the Sri Lankan military was carrying out this brutal offensive against the Tamil areas in the north, and thousands of Tamil civilians were being killed. And I began exploring more and more about Sri Lanka's history and what led up to this moment. And through my research, I came across a Sri Lankan Tamil writer in the diaspora in Canada. His name is DBS Jayaraj. He had written a number of articles about Neelan Tiruchelvam, and he wrote about the proposals that Neelan introduced in 1995, which were designed to address the grievances of the Tamil minority community, but they were proposals that sought to peacefully end the civil war under a united Sri Lanka. And then I read through his writings about how Neelan was vilified by the Tamil separatist rebel group, the Tamil Tigers, because he had a different vision for how Tamil grievances should be addressed instead of a separate state. He wanted to address them under a united Sri Lanka. And when I read more and more about Neelan's proposals, they were the boldest and most progressive attempt to redress the grievances of the minority community that Sri Lanka has ever put forward. When I looked at the Tamil diaspora here, in Canada and in other parts of the world, I noticed that there was nobody talking about Neelan Tiruchelvam. His voice had been silenced. His legacy had been forgotten. So I decided to just do a documentary to help uh, uplift and give voice to his legacy, and to help inspire other people to advocate many of the values of pluralism and coexistence that Neelan had championed. I should also mention that what inspired me to do a documentary specifically was because around this time I had been learning about Neelan. I had come across a documentary by a fellow Canadian filmmaker by the name of Helene Kladowski called No More Tear Sister. And it was about a woman by the name of a Sri Lankan Tamil woman by the name of Dr. Rajani Thirunagama, and she was somebody who had been a member of the LTTE, but she later left the LTTE, and she was increasingly speaking out about the LTTE's atrocities against Tamils during the Civil War, and she was killed by the LTTE, similar to Neelan. And there was a documentary done about her life, which highlighted her legacies. I very much thought that the same should be done for Neelan, whose voice was also silenced. So that's what inspired me.
Right. Before getting into more details on Nilan's principles, let me ask you that what is the current situation of Tamil population in Sri Lanka? Are they empowered now, or the situation is still continuing where they are living in under discrimination?
The situation in Sri Lanka for the Tamil people is very much the same, in the sense that their grievances have not been addressed through a constitutional solution. Still, there's has not been meaningful constitutional reform in Sri Lanka that addresses the grievances of the minority communities in Sri Lanka, whether they be the Tamils or the Muslims. Sri Lanka still has the same constitution it has since 1978, essentially, which is a very unitary constitution, which results in power being concentrated at the central government. The way Sri Lanka's power sharing structure operates is power that the central government gives to the regions. They give it with one hand and they can take it back with the other. That's the way Sri Lanka's power sharing structure works. So to have this kind of structure is fundamentally incompatible with addressing the grievances of the Tamil minority communities, because it leaves them at the mercy of the Sinhala dominated central government, whereas Tamils want their own level of autonomy without having intrusion from the central government. And Neelan's proposals were to transform Sri Lanka into a union of regions and to give autonomy to the regions of Sri Lanka under a united structure, a federal structure, we can say. And we can get more into that later on.
Now, let us get back to this big question of Nilan's proposal. Like what kind of change it would have brought, and what he wanted, and how his proposal of having a separate province would have changed the situation for them.
Sri Lanka's political governing structure operates under a unitary state. The way that Sri Lanka's governing structure works is power is consolidated at the center, and whatever powers the central government gives to the regions with one hand can be unilaterally taken away with the other. So what Neelan's proposals did is it sought to do away with the unitary state and to make Sri Lanka a union of regions. The initial proposals envisaged creating 8 autonomous regions of Sri Lanka, whereby power would be devolved from the central government to the regions, and there will be checks and balances in place that would make it extremely difficult for the central government to then unilaterally take away those powers with respect to land, policing, financing, education. There are powers that were significantly devolved to the regions that would make it very difficult for them to take those powers back. So under Sri Lanka's power sharing structure, which was brought about by the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution, in 1987, Indian government, they militarily intervened in Sri Lanka under the pretense of resolving the ethnic conflicts. Then Sri Lankan President J.R. Jayawardena, he invited Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi to help bring about an end to the ethnic conflict. That was the public pretense, but we can debate if that was actually why he was brought into Sri Lanka. So J.R. Jayawardena was a politician, a Sinhala nationalist, a hardliner who was very Machiavellian, very manipulative in the way that he carried out his politics. And so he had brought in the Indian government to help mediate an end to the ethnic conflict, and the Indian government introduced a set of power sharing, which was adopted under the 13th Amendment to Sri Lanka's constitution. The power sharing proposals that India had given to Sri Lanka was that there would be a provincial council system whereby the way power sharing would operate is that Sri Lanka would maintain its character as a unitary state, but you would have power at the central government, and then you would have powers that the central government would devolve to the regions, and that would be known as the regional list. And then you would have something known as the concurrent list, whereby powers would be shared by the central government and the regions, joint powers. But the way the concurrent list operated is that whatever powers the central government would give to the regions, those powers could be unilaterally taken away under any pretense. And that's the current power sharing structure, which was adopted in 1987, which Sri Lanka still has. And this had upset not only the Tamil people in the Tamil regions, but also the Sinhala people in the Sinhala regions, because what it in fact did is it left Sinhala politicians in their respective regions, like the chief ministers in their respective regions, it left them without any autonomy, without any power, because they were at the mercy of the central government. If a central government had come into power that was opposed to their views, that central government can unilaterally take away those powers that they had given to the regions. So both Tamil politicians and Sinhalese politicians fundamentally wanted a power sharing that would give them autonomy. So what Neelan's proposals in August 3rd, 1995 did is it abolished the concurrent list, and it instead gave powers for the central government and for the regional government, and it made those powers defined and distinct. And Neelan's proposals advocated for a reconciliation mechanism whereby, in the case of any disputes between the center and the regions regarding power sharing, there would be communication and consensus among all the individuals within the regions, and they would come to a consensus with the central government. So in Neelan's proposals, even though the governor was appointed by the central government, the governor was directly accountable to the chief minister. The chief minister was directly accountable to the local. So we had significant checks and balances, which would make it very difficult for the central government to come in, devolve power, and then unilaterally take it away. You will need to have the concurrence. The governor needed to have the concurrence of the chief minister. Chief minister had to have the concurrence of the support of the local government. It made it very difficult for the central government to take away those powers. So this would benefit not only Tamils, but also Sinhalese people as well. This was a fundamental reimagining of Sri Lanka, and that's why the proposals remain to be the boldest attempt to address the grievances of the Sri Lankan minority communities to date. That's essentially the fundamental principles of Neelan's proposals.
So, what was the reaction of these proposals, and what is the situation of the politicians on these proposals right now?
The president who introduced the proposals, her name was Chandrika Kumaratunga, and she had come into power after 17 years of continuous rule by the United National Party. The United National Party was a very Sinhala nationalist hardliner party under which Tamils were subjected to a brutal ethnic pogrom in 1983 in Colombo, which had triggered a 25-year civil war. Tamils saw the Indian peacekeeping forces come into the country, committing massive atrocities in the north. Massacres were committed by the Indian peacekeeping forces and by the Sri Lankan armed forces against Tamil civilians in the north and east. So all of this was happening within 17 years of UNP rule prior to 1994, when Chandrika Kumaratunga came into power. Chandrika Kumaratunga, she was somebody who was new to the political landscape, and she had campaigned in 1994 during the presidential elections explicitly on a platform of peacefully bringing a constitutional solution to end the civil war in Sri Lanka. And she won 62% of the national vote, which meant that she got significant support from the Sinhala majority as well as the Tamil minority in the north of the country. And she was elected on that platform to bring an end to the civil war. Unfortunately, when she was elected, she did not have a 2/3 majority that you needed to implement constitutional reform. So she needed support from the opposition party, the United National Party. So when the proposals were released, she had campaigned on negotiating with the Tamil separatist group, Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, LTTE. So when she was elected in November 1994, she had reached a ceasefire agreement with the LTTE in January 1995, and she was trying to have discussions with the LTTE leader informally to try to address their political grievances. The LTTE was not concerned about addressing the political grievances. They wanted the Sri Lankan government to lift the harsh economic and embargo, the military restrictions that they had on the north, which prevented goods from coming into the north of the country, the north and east, where the LTTE operated. Prabhakaran, the LTTE leader, was demanding the government lift its harsh embargo on the north and east of the country and to allow goods to come in. The President Kumaratunga, she agreed to some but not all of the LTTE's demands. And in April of 1995, the LTTE broke the ceasefire agreement with the Kumaratunga government, and they resumed the war. And the Sri Lankan government was then fighting the war against the Tamil Tigers. And despite the war having resumed and the ceasefire having been broken, President Kumaratunga, she was determined to continue to bring forward a new constitution for Sri Lanka. So on August 3rd, 1995, Chandrika Kumaratunga publicly released the Union of Regions proposal, in which Neelan Tiruchelvam, then a member of parliament, was significantly involved in its drafting. And when the proposals were released, the LTTE refused to negotiate with them, and the United National Party, the opposition party, refused to negotiate with those proposals as well, primarily because the United National Party did not want to give Chandrika Kumaratunga, a rival politician, credit for bringing an end to the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka. Throughout Sri Lanka's history since independence, you had a case where there was party rivalry between the two main political parties in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan Freedom Party and the United National Party. President Kumaratunga was part of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. When she was in power, and so throughout Sri Lanka's history, if one party was in power and they were trying to make a reconciliation with the Tamil minority community, the other oppositional party would try to sabotage that agreement. Or when in 1995, when Chandrika Kumaratunga released these proposals, the United National Party refused to give the needed votes so that she could get the 2/3 majority. What ended up happening is Chandrika Kumaratunga, in an attempt to get the 2/3 majority, she diluted Neelan's proposals in 1997 and 2000, so much so that she did away with the reconciliation mechanism that was very popular in the proposals to resolve disputes between the center and the regions. The democratically elected Tamil United Liberation Front, the democratically elected Tamil political party, rejected the diluted versions of Neelan's proposals when Chandrika had introduced it in government in August 3rd, 2000, 5 years to the day that she had released her original Union of Regions proposals. The Tamil United Liberation Front, the Tamil political party, rejected it. And when Chandrika introduced it in Parliament on August 3rd, 2000, the United National Party tore up the proposals in Parliament and set them on fire, literally in the chambers of Parliament. That was the end of that constitution.
Those visuals are still on YouTube,
Mm,
some of them.
mm.
So, what is the situation right now? I understood up to 2000 it was diluted, but what is the present situation now? What is the view of the present political parties, especially those who are in power right now?
So in Sri Lanka, it's a very unique time in Sri Lanka, which is also what compelled me to release this documentary now. So in Sri Lanka, for the first time, a third party outside the traditional two-party structure of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, United National Party, a third party known as the National People's Party has come into power. And not only is the National People's Party the governing party of Sri Lanka, but they have a supermajority in Sri Lanka, which means that they have a greater than 2/3 majority in the House. This means that they could implement a new constitution for Sri Lanka. So the leader of the National People's Party is President Anura Kumara Dissanayaka, who had campaigned on bringing forward a new constitution for Sri Lanka. And he had campaigned on abolishing the executive presidency for Sri Lanka. The executive presidency is a very Sri Lanka has a presidential system whereby the executive president, you have a president and you have a prime minister, but the executive president has somewhat authoritarian powers that allows him to curb the interests of parliament and to implement whatever desires he or she has. So President Dissanayaka campaigned on abolishing the executive presidency. President Dissanayaka campaigned on a new constitution that would devolve power from the center to the regions, give a right up to the local government, giving them power. And so Neelan's proposals also advocated for abolishing the executive presidency, for devolving power from the center to the regions. So a lot of President Dissanayaka's promises during his election campaign very much mirror Neelan's proposals. And so this fundamental willingness to see a new political party outside the two-party structure had won significant support within the north, the Tamils in the country, as well as the Sinhalese people in the country. And this president has promised to bring forward a new constitution. Unfortunately, since he has been in power, President Dissanayaka has not made any moves towards constitutional reform. He's been exclusively focused on tackling the economic and corruption problems of the country. You might remember that in 2022, then Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was chased out of the country as a result of Sri Lanka's economy going in free fall. Sri Lanka was experiencing the worst economic recession since its independence. So when the next democratic elections were held, the National People's Party had come into power, which was a coalition of left-wing political factions that's come into power. So that's why President Dissanayaka has been so focused on tackling the economic problems and corruption in the country. However, I would argue that by focusing on economic and corruption problems without initially addressing the flawed constitutional structure of Sri Lanka, then any reforms you're going to implement will not have meaningful and lasting effects. So the reason why I released this documentary now is because Sri Lanka has a rare, genuine opportunity with a supermajority in parliament to enact a new constitution for the country. And so I want Sri Lankan people watching the documentary to be inspired to see the problems of Sri Lanka's current constitution, the flaws of its unitary structure, the centralized nature of Sri Lanka's political power sharing structure, to see those problems and to advocate solutions like Neelan's proposals, which remain the boldest attempt to redress the grievances of the minority communities, but also the most progressive proposals to tackle and dismantle Sri Lanka's centralized majoritarian constitution.
Right. I will ask the very last question. Actually, it has two parts of the last question, because one part is that, do you think that documentary filmmaking can be a form of political resistance or healing? That's the first question. And the second one is that, what do you hope viewers take away from Neelan Unsilenced?
I think that documentaries can inspire people to actively mobilize and to pressure governments for change. And I mean, we saw this even outside of politics in the case of the Me Too movement, where so many documentaries were being put out, and these documentaries fundamentally resulted in people lobbying for governments to implement legislation that would result in their cases being heard in court and them having some measure of justice. In the case of Sri Lanka, within the Tamil community, there was a documentary that was released by the British channel, Channel 4, which looked at the killing fields of Sri Lanka during the final stages of Sri Lanka's civil war in 2009. And that documentary exposed the Sri Lankan military's horrendous atrocities during the final stages of the civil war. So that documentary had inspired significant international awareness and scrutiny against Sri Lanka and had mobilized even Sri Lankan Tamil people to take action. So I believe that documentary filmmaking is a very powerful force that can inspire, educate people, and can help mobilize change. And the thing that I'd like for people to take away in terms of Neelan's watching this documentary, Neelan Unsilenced, is two things. One thing is that Neelan was somebody who was a constitutional scholar and an academic whose work and legacy can't be solely confined to Sri Lanka. And what Neelan did is he took his knowledge from Sri Lanka, the need for minority communities and diverse communities to have constitutional rights and to coexist. So Neelan fundamentally believed that a democratic framework, democracy is essential for any meaningful change to come about. Democracy is the needed groundwork. It can't be through authoritarianship. So Neelan was somebody who believed in coexistence, in pluralism, in democratic governance. And the second thing I think that people should take away is that Neelan, throughout his life as an academic and as a politician, he had repeatedly emphasized the importance of the sanctity of life. He routinely spoke about atrocities committed against Tamil people by the Sri Lankan army, the Sri Lankan government. And Neelan was speaking about these atrocities and emphasizing the sanctity of life, how important life is. So when LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, would become suicide bombers and would carry a cyanide capsule around their neck, Neelan was speaking about how important life is and how you shouldn't squander life, how valuable every single life is.
Thank you, Prasanna. Thank you very much for giving us the time and to explain the documentary and the man behind the documentary, Advocate Neelan, a politician and a lawmaker. Dr. Neelan's legacy is one of courage, intellect, and unwavering commitment to justice. A Harvard trained legal scholar and parliamentarian, Neelan championed constitutional reform in Sri Lanka, proposing a decentralized model of governance to address ethnic tensions and promote peace. His Union of Regions proposal was a visionary attempt to reconcile a fractured nation. Beyond Sri Lanka, Neelan's influence reached global shores, advising post Soviet Kazakhstan on constitutional design, participating in international election monitoring, and founding institutions like the International Center for Ethnic Studies and the Law and Society Trust. These organizations continued to foster dialogue, legal empowerment, and civic engagement. His assassination was a devastating blow to peace efforts, but his ideas endure. Through Neelan Unsilenced, Prasanna Shanmugathas has ensured that Neelan's voice continues to challenge, inspire, and guide us. Thank you for joining us on this journey through memory and resistance. This has been the SADF podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and never stop listening. And also, don't forget to watch the documentary. The link is provided in the description below. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prasanna.
Thank you so much.